Sebastian had always been careful. The kind of careful where even his thoughts were measured, careful to avoid stepping over lines that weren't meant to be crossed. But Jack, his best friend for the past 5 years, made it difficult. Jack was everything Sebastian had always wanted: confident, charming, effortlessly cool. He was everything Sebastian wasn't, but in their friendship, it didn't matter. Or at least, that's what Sebastian told himself. Their friendship had begun in a surprisingly ordinary way. They met at college, two strangers assigned to the same dorm. They bonded over a mutual love of bad coffee and long conversations that stretched into the early morning. Jack was the type of person who attracted people, and Sebastian, reserved, introverted, had found himself drawn to him in a way that made him feel both comforted and increasingly vulnerable. It wasn't long before Sebastian realized his feelings for Jack were no longer purely platonic. He tried to suppress them, bury them under layers of denial, convincing himself that the strength of their friendship was enough. Jack would never be interested in him that way. Jack was straight, and Sebastian knew it. Yet, every time Jack smiled, or when their hands brushed by accident, or when they spent hours talking about nothing and everything, Sebastian's heart raced. He would steal moments where Jack's laughter made the world feel like it was just the two of them. But even as the warmth of those moments filled him, there was always the nagging voice in the back of his mind. You can't cross that line. Don't ruin this. He's your friend. Winter had always been a strange time for Sebastian. The cold weather brought a kind of loneliness with it, a deep yearning that became impossible to ignore. It was the season when the warmth of others felt more precious, and the ache of unrequited feelings more pronounced. They were spending more time together this winter than ever before, almost as if Jack could sense something in Sebastian that he couldn't quite name. But it was too late to back out now. The snow fell gently outside, dusting the world with a quiet softness, but inside, the apartment they shared for the weekend was warm and filled with the scent of stale pizza and half-drunk beers. It was the kind of evening that felt both comforting and dangerous. Jack sprawled on the couch, his legs hanging off the side, his shirt rumpled from the day. Sebastian sat on the armchair, the glow from the TV casting shadows on the walls, but neither of them was paying attention to it. They hadn't been talking much, just the occasional comment about the movie they weren't watching. It was the silence that grew between them that unnerved Sebastian, not the comfortable kind that came with familiarity, but the kind that made him hyper-aware of every detail. Jack was looking out the window, his gaze distant. Sebastian couldn't help but notice the way his fingers tapped absently on the armrest of the couch, the way his lips curled into a smile whenever he caught Sebastian's eye. "Hey, you all right?" Jack's voice broke the silence, and Sebastian felt his chest tighten. Jack had a way of making every word sound sincere, like it was the most important thing in the world. "Yeah, just thinking," Sebastian replied, trying to sound casual. He knew Jack wasn't looking for a deep conversation, but the truth was, Sebastian was always thinking when it came to him. He wondered what it would be like if Jack knew, if Jack could somehow see through the walls Sebastian had built around himself. Would he still be there? Would their friendship survive the truth? Jack shifted in his seat, turning to face him, his expression soft. "About what?" Sebastian hesitated, unsure how to answer. He could feel the vulnerability creeping up his spine, an uncomfortable mix of longing and fear. "It's about you." Jack blinked, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face, but he didn't press. "Psst. Yeah," Sebastian said, his voice quieter now, more strained. "I mean, I don't know. I guess I just wonder what would happen if things were different." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Jack didn't seem to fully grasp the weight of what Sebastian was saying, and part of him was grateful for that. It was easier this way, better to keep things veiled, better to let the distance between them remain. But the silence that followed wasn't comfortable anymore. It stretched too far, making Sebastian aware of every shift in his breath, every thought that crossed his mind. Jack leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with Sebastian's in a way that made him swallow hard. "You're acting weird, man. You okay?" Sebastian forced a smile, though it felt wrong on his face. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." But Jack wasn't buying it. He studied Sebastian with a thoughtful expression before standing up and walking over to the armchair. "Come here." Sebastian's pulse quickened as Jack sat next to him, far too close for comfort, yet not close enough to feel like an invasion. Jack had always been affectionate in his own way, slapping him on the back after a joke, pulling him into an embrace when something big happened in their lives. But this felt different. There was something unspoken between them now, something that neither of them had acknowledged but both of them felt. Jack's hand brushed against Sebastian's arm, just a light touch, but it sent a shock through him. Sebastian couldn't breathe. His mind raced as Jack's proximity seemed to blur the lines that had always kept him grounded in the friendship they had. The room seemed to close in around him, the quiet pressing in on all sides. He wanted to say something, wanted to speak the truth, but all he could do was look at Jack, his heart pounding, his hands trembling. "You sure you're okay?" Jack asked again, his voice lower this time, almost a whisper. He was leaning in now, his gaze softer, more concerned. The space between them had disappeared, and the warmth of Jack's body made Sebastian feel both comforted and terrified. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat as Jack's face drew nearer, closer than ever before. In that moment, everything, the friendship, the years of carefully guarded feelings, came to a head. And Sebastian had a choice to make. Would he push Jack away and protect his heart from the inevitable disappointment? Or would he cross that line, knowing it might shatter everything? But before he could decide, Jack pulled him into a hug. The embrace wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was the kind of hug they'd shared countless times before, but this time it felt different. The warmth of Jack's chest against his, the way their bodies fit together, felt like more than just a friendly gesture. For a split second, Sebastian allowed himself to relax into the hug, to let go of his guard. But when the hug lingered, when Jack's hand gently rubbed his back, the unspoken truth between them became impossible to ignore. Sebastian pulled back slightly, his heart racing in a way he couldn't control. Jack didn't seem to notice the change, still smiling at him as if nothing had shifted. But Sebastian knew something had changed. And there was no going back. The night was heavy with snow, a soft, relentless cascade of flakes outside the window, casting everything in a muted glow. Inside, the warmth of the room was a stark contrast to the cold that enveloped the world beyond. Sebastian sat on the couch, his legs pulled beneath him, staring at the fire crackling lazily in the hearth. The weight of the evening hung over him like a storm cloud, and every flicker of the flames seemed to echo his racing thoughts. Jack was next to him, his presence a constant pull that Sebastian couldn't escape. It had been 2 days since that hug, the one that had lasted a fraction too long, a moment too intimate. Since then, the air between them had been charged, the tension between their usual camaraderie and something darker simmering beneath the surface. Jack hadn't brought it up, hadn't mentioned anything, and part of Sebastian hated him for it. The silence was unbearable, and it only made his feelings grow more impossible to ignore. Jack shifted on the couch beside him, a familiar motion, and for the briefest moment, their shoulders brushed. A simple, unremarkable contact. But to Sebastian, it was everything. His pulse skipped, and he felt his body respond, betraying him with a flush of heat that spread from his chest to his face. His mind screamed at him to pull away, to stop thinking about it, to stop wanting what could never be. But in the silence that followed, the only sound was the crackling of the fire, a small, safe sound in a room that was anything but. Jack was talking now, something about a movie they'd both seen before, but Sebastian couldn't focus. His gaze lingered on Jack's lips as they moved, the curve of his smile, the way his eyes lit up when he laughed. It was too much, and Sebastian felt the suffocating weight of his unspoken truth threatening to crush him. "Sebastian?" Jack's voice pulled him from his thoughts, sharp and unexpected. "You okay?" Sebastian's heart slammed against his ribs, and for a second he couldn't breathe. Jack's eyes were on him now, and there was a softness in them that made Sebastian's stomach flip. He forced himself to meet Jack's gaze, hoping his face didn't betray him, praying Jack wouldn't see the rawness, the longing, that was now so clearly etched in his expression. "Yeah," Sebastian said, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm fine. Just tired." Jack didn't seem convinced, but he let it go, turning his attention back to the fire. But Sebastian could feel it, the unspoken question that lingered between them. Was Jack aware of what had happened? Of the way everything had shifted? Of how one touch had unraveled years of carefully buried feelings? They sat in the silence for a moment longer, the tension rising with every passing second. Then, without warning, Jack moved closer, his shoulder pressing against Sebastian's. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat, and his heart skipped a beat. The warmth of Jack's body next to his was like a magnet, drawing him in, and for a moment, Sebastian forgot everything, forgot the consequences, forgot the years of friendship, and just felt. Jack's arm brushed against his, and it was a casual gesture, nothing out of the ordinary. But to Sebastian, it felt like an invitation, a promise of something more. It wasn't just a touch. It was everything Sebastian had ever wanted, all wrapped up in that simple movement. His body responded before his mind could catch up, leaning in just a fraction closer, their sides now pressed together. The space between them was gone, and Sebastian felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. Jack turned his head then, his face inches from Sebastian's. The soft glow of the fire illuminated his features, casting shadows across his jawline, making him look impossibly close. Sebastian's pulse thundered in his ears, and all rational thought disappeared. His breath hitched, and for the briefest of moments, he thought Jack might kiss him. The air between them seemed to hum with the possibility, with the weight of everything unsaid. But then Jack spoke, and the spell was broken. "You sure you're all right?" Jack's voice was warm, concerned, but there was a hint of something else in it, something that made Sebastian's stomach twist. Was Jack aware? Had he felt it too, the shift in the air, the spark between them? Sebastian swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. "Yeah. Just tired," he repeated, but his voice felt thin, almost brittle. He could feel the lie hanging in the space between them, and he hated himself for it. But what else could he say? He couldn't admit the truth, not now, not when it could ruin everything. Jack nodded slowly, seeming to accept the answer. But as he turned back to the fire, Sebastian's thoughts spiraled out of control. His body was still tense, still too aware of Jack's proximity. He had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. And it wasn't just the physical closeness that rattled him. It was the uncertainty, the fear of what this could mean. Could he keep pretending that nothing had changed? Could he keep burying his feelings, ignoring the ache that had grown inside him over the years? The longer he sat there, the more it seemed like the walls he had built around his heart were crumbling, piece by piece. He had always kept his feelings for Jack locked away, hidden beneath layers of friendship and quiet denial. But now, with every glance, every touch, the truth felt more impossible to ignore. The night stretched on, and Sebastian's thoughts churned with a desperate need to escape, to run from the emotions that had begun to consume him. But he couldn't. He couldn't leave Jack. Not like this. As the fire flickered low, Jack stood up, stretching. "I'm gonna grab another drink," he said casually, but Sebastian noticed the slight hesitation in his movements, as if he was waiting for something, waiting for Sebastian to say something, to do something. But Sebastian didn't move. He stayed on the couch, frozen in place, torn between the desire to reach out, to take the leap, and the fear that it would all come crashing down if he did. Jack paused at the doorframe, looking back over his shoulder. "You sure you're okay?" His voice was softer now, almost tentative, and it made Sebastian's heart twist. Sebastian opened his mouth to answer, but the words caught in his throat. The truth was he wasn't okay. Not at all. But he couldn't say that. Not yet. "Yeah," he said again, the word feeling hollow. "I'm fine." Jack gave him a long, searching look, as if he was trying to decide whether or not to press further. But then he simply nodded and left, the door closing softly behind him. Sebastian sat there in the silence, alone with his thoughts. He had been given a choice in that moment, to act on his feelings or to bury them deeper, to pretend that nothing had changed. But now, with Jack gone and the weight of the truth settling heavily in his chest, he knew there was no turning back. Sebastian awoke to an oppressive silence. The house was still, the winter morning light filtering through the curtains in a faint, gray glow. His mind was a mess, tangled in the threads of the previous night, the hug, the lingering touches, the brief moments where everything felt so dangerously close to something he couldn't define. The thoughts wouldn't leave him. They were like ghosts, haunting the edges of his consciousness, pushing against the walls he had so carefully built. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen. It was never supposed to be like this. But with every look Jack had given him, every moment they had shared, Sebastian felt the pull of something deeper, something more. And now he couldn't pretend anymore. The line between friendship and something more had blurred, and there was no way to unsee what he had begun to feel. Jack was in the kitchen when Sebastian finally emerged, his figure outlined in the soft light, moving around casually as if nothing had changed. The scent of brewing coffee filled the air, familiar and comforting, but it couldn't mask the tension that hung between them. Every step Sebastian took toward the kitchen felt like an act of defiance, like he was walking straight into the storm he had tried so desperately to avoid. Jack looked up as he entered, his face breaking into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice light, but there was an unmistakable hesitation in it. "You sleep okay?" "Yeah," Sebastian replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "I slept." The silence that followed felt thick, oppressive. Jack busied himself with the coffee pot, the sound of the water filling the machine breaking the stillness. Sebastian leaned against the counter, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension. But what was there to say? The truth? Could he say it aloud? Jack turned, holding out a mug of coffee. "Here, you look like you need it." Sebastian took the mug with a grateful nod, but it did little to calm the storm inside him. His mind raced. How could he go on pretending everything was normal? How could he sit here, drinking coffee with Jack, when he was so aware of every subtle shift in the air between them? Every time their eyes met, it felt like something unspeakable passed between them, something neither of them was willing to confront. "Jack, we need to talk," Sebastian said before he could stop himself. The words tumbled out, and for the first time in days, he felt the weight of what he had been avoiding. There was no going back now. This was the moment where everything would change. Jack set his mug down slowly, his expression unreadable. "About what?" Sebastian hesitated, unsure how to begin. The words felt foreign in his mouth, the truth too sharp to articulate. He wanted to tell Jack everything, how he had spent the last few days fighting the feelings that had only grown stronger, how his chest ached every time Jack smiled at him. But the fear of ruining everything, of losing him forever, kept him silent. "You know what I mean," Sebastian finally said, his voice lower now. "About last night?" Jack stiffened, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What about last night?" Sebastian felt his throat tighten. He had imagined this conversation 1,000 times in his head, but now that it was happening, everything felt wrong. Jack was looking at him like he didn't understand, like he hadn't noticed the shift in their friendship, the things that had been left unsaid. "Jack," Sebastian began again, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions, "I can't keep pretending like nothing has changed. It's killing me. The way you look at me, the way you touch me, it's like everything is..." He stopped, taking a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "I've been hiding it for so long, but I can't anymore. I'm in love with you." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack didn't say anything, didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes locked on Sebastian, as if processing what he had just heard. Sebastian's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe he had ruined everything. Maybe he had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But Jack's expression softened, his lips parting as if to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The air between them was thick with tension, both of them trapped in the space that had opened up between them. Jack stepped closer, slowly, until he was standing just a few inches away. Sebastian could feel the heat radiating off him, the familiar scent of his cologne mixing with the sharp scent of coffee. His pulse raced, and every nerve in his body screamed at him to step back, to run. But he didn't. He stayed, rooted to the spot, waiting for Jack to say something. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice softer now, tinged with something Sebastian couldn't place. "Sebastian, I don't know what to say." Sebastian's heart sank. He had known, deep down, that Jack would never feel the same. He had always known. But hearing those words, "I don't know what to say," stung in a way he hadn't expected. "I didn't mean to put this on you," Sebastian said quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I know this is crazy. I know you're straight and I should have never—" "Wait," Jack interrupted, holding up a hand. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Sebastian's with a level of intensity that made his stomach twist. "It's not that, okay? I don't know what I feel, Seb. This is all new to me." Sebastian's mind raced, his heart thumping wildly. "What do you mean?" Jack hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I've never felt this way about a guy before. Hell, I never thought I would. But last night, I felt something too. I'm not sure what it is, but I can't deny it." Sebastian's breath caught in his throat. His heart fluttered with hope, but he tempered it with caution. "So, what does that mean?" Jack looked at him, his expression torn. "I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But I need time to figure this out. I'm not saying no, Seb. I need to understand what this means, what we mean." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sebastian allowed himself to breathe. There was no promise of an easy resolution, no guarantee that this would turn out the way he wanted. But in Jack's words, there was something more, something that suggested this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. And despite the uncertainty, despite the fear of what might come next, Sebastian couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. "I'll give you time," Sebastian said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm that still raged inside him. "I'm not going anywhere, Jack." Jack nodded, his eyes softer now. "Neither am I." And for the first time in days, Sebastian felt a quiet peace settle in his chest. The future was unknown, uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he was no longer facing it alone.